This once fed human beings for thousands of years, yet today it is dismissed as obsolete, inefficient, or quietly replaced by chemicals you are told to buy every season. Modern agriculture teaches a single, unchallenged rule: without fertilizer, nothing grows. Fields are measured not by what the soil can do, but by what must be added to it. Nitrogen, the most essential element for plant growth, is treated as a product rather than a process, something extracted, manufactured, packaged, sold, and reapplied year after year. This belief feels so natural that few people ever question it. And that is precisely where the paradox begins. Because long before industrial chemistry, before factories and pipelines, humans grew food using plants that pulled nitrogen directly from the air. They did not mine it. They did not synthesize it. They did not pay for it. The atmosphere did the work. Somewhere between necessity and profit, that knowledge was set aside, not disproven, not outlawed, simply forgotten. Today, entire food systems depend on inputs that must be purchased repeatedly, while living organisms capable of doing the same work for free are ignored. The question is not whether this alternative ever existed. The question is why, in a world that claims efficiency as its highest value, the most efficient solution of all quietly disappeared from view. And once you see it, you cannot unsee the cost of believing it never mattered. After the Second World War, farming in the United States changed faster than at any other moment in human history. Factories that once produced explosives were retooled to produce synthetic nitrogen. The chemistry was familiar, the infrastructure already built, and the urgency of feeding a growing nation made the transition feel inevitable. Fields that once relied on crop rotation and soil biology were now fed by bags, trucks, and pipelines. Yields rose quickly, and with them came a powerful new lesson that would be passed down for generations. Productivity was no longer linked to what the land could regenerate on its own, but to how much could be added from the outside. Fertilizer was no longer a supplement. It became the foundation. By the middle of the 20th century, nitrogen was treated less like part of a natural cycle and more like fuel. You bought it, you applied it, you watched the crops respond. And when the soil weakened, the answer was never to ask why. The answer was always to apply more. This system worked well enough to silence doubt. It created abundance, but it also created dependence. Farmers learned to calculate harvests based on input costs. Governments learned to subsidize chemicals rather than biology, and an entire culture learned to believe that without industrial fertilizer, modern agriculture would simply stop. Once that belief hardened, alternatives were no longer explored. They became irrelevant by assumption, not by evidence. In 1975, a quiet interruption appeared inside the scientific record. The United States National Academy of Sciences released a report examining underutilized plants with potential to address global malnutrition. It was not a manifesto. It was not political. It was written in the careful, restrained language of institutional science. Yet one entry stood out. The panel described a plant so nutritionally dense, so biologically efficient, that they referred to it as a supermarket on a single stalk. Nearly every part of it could be eaten. Leaves, flowers, pods, seeds, even underground storage organs. More importantly, it did not require the very input modern agriculture had declared indispensable. This plant produced its own nitrogen through a natural partnership in the soil. The implication was profound. If such a crop were adopted at scale, it could reduce dependence on synthetic fertilizer while improving soil health at the same time. Research stations took notice. Small trials began in tropical regions. Early results confirmed what local farmers had known for generations. The plant performed exactly as described. Then the momentum slowed. Funding tapered off. Extension programs failed to materialize. No large-scale adoption followed. The report remained archived, cited occasionally, but never acted upon. The discovery was not rejected. It was simply left without a future. And in science, what is not continued quietly disappears. The plant at the center of this story is known as the winged bean. It is a climbing legume native to Southeast Asia, cultivated quietly for generations in places where soil was poor and inputs were scarce. At first glance, it looks unremarkable. A vine with 3-part leaves, pale blue flowers, and long pods marked by 4 distinct ridges. What makes it different is not how it looks above the ground, but what happens below it. Along its roots form small nodules, each housing living bacteria that perform one of nature's most efficient chemical transformations. They take nitrogen gas from the air, something plants cannot normally use, and convert it into forms that feed growth. This process is called biological nitrogen fixation, and it runs without factories, without fuel, and without invoices. As the plant grows, it feeds itself. When it dies back or sheds roots, the nitrogen remains in the soil, enriching whatever is planted next. In practical terms, the winged bean does not just grow food, it rebuilds fertility. It turns empty air into nourishment and leaves the ground better than it found it. That single ability places it in direct conflict with a system built on selling nitrogen as a product rather than recognizing it as a cycle. When the numbers are examined without ideology, the scale of the difference becomes difficult to ignore. In healthy soils, nitrogen-fixing legumes are capable of contributing tens to hundreds of kilograms of usable nitrogen per hectare in a single growing season. Converted into the language of industrial agriculture, that amount represents hundreds of dollars in synthetic fertilizer that never needs to be purchased, transported, or applied. And unlike chemical nitrogen, which often leaches into waterways or evaporates into the atmosphere, biologically fixed nitrogen enters the soil slowly and remains where plants can actually use it. The contrast is structural. Synthetic fertilizer delivers a surge followed by loss. Living systems deliver continuity. Over time, repeated applications of chemical nitrogen degrade soil biology, reducing its ability to retain nutrients. Farmers respond by applying more. The cycle tightens. By comparison, fields integrated with nitrogen-fixing plants show improved soil structure, higher organic matter, and increased resilience to drought. These are not experimental claims. They have been documented across decades of agronomic research. Yet the economic model does not reward outcomes that cannot be sold repeatedly. A hectare that regenerates its own fertility removes itself from the marketplace. It reduces demand not once, but permanently. When multiplied across millions of farms, the implication becomes clear. This is not a marginal efficiency gain. It is a direct challenge to an industry whose revenue depends on the assumption that nitrogen must always come from a factory. The data does not threaten that assumption. The consequences of acting on it do. By the late 20th century, agriculture stood at a quiet crossroads, though it was rarely described that way. On one path was a system that required constant purchases of fertilizer every season, seed every year, chemicals to correct the damage caused by the last round of chemicals. It generated predictable revenue, measurable growth, and investors who understood exactly where profit came from. On the other path were crops that asked for very little, plants that renewed the soil instead of exhausting it, seeds that could be saved, fertility that increased rather than declined. From a biological perspective, the second path made sense. From an economic perspective, it did not. A farmer who does not need to buy nitrogen is not a customer. A field that improves itself does not create repeat sales. When research funding is allocated, when extension programs are scaled, and when policies are written, those incentives matter. No committee needed to meet to suppress alternatives. No ban was required. The system simply invested in what multiplied dependence and ignored what reduced it. Over time, that imbalance hardened into inevitability. Crops that aligned with the input model advanced. Those that undermined it stalled. The result looks like progress, but it is better described as selection. Not for yield alone, but for compatibility with an economy built on continuous extraction. In that environment, a plant that produces its own fertility is not disruptive because it fails. It is disruptive because it succeeds too completely. The consequences of that choice are no longer theoretical. They are visible in balance sheets, in soil tests, and in moments of crisis when the system is placed under stress. Farmers today spend a growing share of their income on inputs that did not exist a century ago. Nitrogen prices fluctuate with energy markets, geopolitics, and supply disruptions far beyond the control of the people who depend on them. When costs rise, margins shrink. When margins shrink, farms consolidate or disappear. At the same time, soils treated as inert substrates lose structure and resilience. They retain less water. They require more correction. What was once a living system becomes a surface that must be managed chemically. This dependency extends beyond the field. When transportation falters or factories slow, food production feels the impact almost immediately. Recent disruptions exposed how quickly shelves empty when inputs fail to arrive on schedule. In that context, the absence of self-fertilizing crops is no longer an academic oversight. It is a vulnerability. A system optimized for efficiency under perfect conditions becomes fragile under pressure. And fragility carries a cost that cannot always be measured in dollars. It appears as uncertainty as risk, and as a quiet realization that modern agriculture no longer remembers how to function without constant external support. Imagine a single disruption that lasts longer than anyone expects. Not a week, not a month, but an entire growing season without reliable access to synthetic fertilizer. No shipments delayed temporarily, no emergency reserves released quietly to stabilize prices. Just a sustained absence. In that situation, how much food do you believe could still be produced using the system as it exists today? Not in theory, but in practice. How many fields would continue to yield at current levels? How many farmers could absorb the loss? How many regions could adapt without outside inputs? This is not a prediction. It is a stress test. One that exposes the difference between productivity and resilience. If food production depends on a constant flow of manufactured nitrogen, then food security depends on everything required to keep that flow uninterrupted. Energy transportation, geopolitics, capital. Remove one link and the entire chain tightens. Now consider the alternative. Crops that renew soil rather than consume it. Systems that function whether or not the next shipment arrives on time. The question becomes unavoidable. Is reliance the same as necessity, or have the two simply been confused for long enough that no one challenges the distinction? If you believe this dependence makes sense, press like. If you believe a system that cannot function without constant purchases is inherently fragile, comment the number 9 below. What happened next was not prohibition, and it was not destruction. The plant was never banned, the research was never disproven. There were no hearings, no public reversals, no declarations that the idea was dangerous. Instead, it faded through omission. It was not included in agricultural textbooks. It was not prioritized in extension programs. It was not funded beyond small trials that quietly expired. Knowledge does not need to be attacked to disappear. It only needs to be ignored long enough. In a system that advances what aligns with its incentives, anything that does not fit is treated as irrelevant by default. Over time, relevance becomes reality. Farmers learn what is taught. Policymakers support what is visible. Consumers accept what is offered. And solutions that reduce dependency rather than monetize it slip out of collective memory without resistance. This is how effective systems manage disruption, not by confrontation but by silence. By ensuring that when the next generation asks how food is grown, the answer contains no reference to alternatives that would undermine the structure holding everything else in place. The result is not ignorance in the crude sense. It is a carefully maintained absence, and absence when sustained feels indistinguishable from truth. Nothing in this story requires belief. The data already exists, the seeds still exist, the biology has never stopped working. What disappeared was not the solution, but the pathway that would have allowed it to spread. Knowledge that is not taught does not feel stolen. It feels as if it never belonged to anyone in the first place. And yet once uncovered, it changes how everything else is seen. Food does not have to begin with dependency. Fertility does not have to arrive in a bag. Systems that regenerate themselves are not fantasies from the past. They are choices that were set aside. The responsibility now does not rest with institutions or industries. It rests with awareness. Whether this remains an archived footnote or becomes living knowledge again depends on who carries it forward. If this perspective challenges what you were taught, subscribe to the channel so this information does not vanish again. If you believe the current system is the only viable option, you do not need to agree. The record can stand on its own. The next investigation will open another archive. A crop that reseeds itself year after year, producing food without replanting, was once classified as a weed because it disrupted annual sales. That vault opens next.